Hi, my name's Stewart Desson. I'm the CEO and founder of Lumina Learning, and I'm going to be taking you through a talk I gave at the BPS DOP conference back in January 2017 in Liverpool. This is a talk on the circumplex model of Lumina Spark, and it is part of the PhD research I'm undertaking with Professors Benton, Golding and Towell. So in terms of the structure, I'm going to tell you how Lumina Spark was developed from an academic perspective, something on the theoretical and the empirical objectives of this particular study. I have some particular results looking at the layout and the structure of the circumplex model, and we'll be looking at 5 factors versus 2-factor models of Lumina Spark. We're going to then link that to workplace performance. How do these things correlate with what happens at work? What can we say and learn about validity, and give you some practical examples. So, in terms of how Spark was developed, it's using the methodology of a German professor called Burisch, who suggested that good psychometrics need to be developed with inductive, deductive and criterion-centric approaches. What does that mean? It actually means that the model has been developed partly with a theory, in this case the theory of the big 5, so we're starting from the assumption that there are 5 factors in the structure of personality. It also needs to be partly empirical, looking at Cronbach alphas and a bottom-up approach to choosing the best items for the questionnaire, and it needs to be criterion-centric because everything needs to be linked to workplace performance, and the items and the model needs to be, the choice of items needs to be linked to good performance in the workplace. So a few things generally about the approach that's adopted. This is obviously a trait, not a type approach. And I'm going to be sharing with you in this talk a 4-factor version, which is the traditional 24 qualities in Spark, as well as the 5-factor version. And it's a balanced view of personality. So the key thing here is we're measuring both ends of the polarities. We're measuring extroversion separately to introversion, for example. And it's a dynamic view of personality. That means that we measure 3 personas. Who am I underneath in my underlying? Who am I every day in terms of my behavior? And how do I perform under pressure or when I may overextend? So the 3 personas form an interesting dynamic within a person. We're not one thing. We change based on the context and the dialogue that we're having and who we're with. So here we have it. If we're designing a big 5 model, the traditional approach is to start with the acronym OCEAN, and then given the context that we're working in, to choose the right labels, the right terminology to define the scales and create the items. This is exactly what we've done with Lumina Spark, big picture thinking, discipline-driven extroversion, people-focused, and the emotional risk reactors would link to OCEAN. But we don't stop there. As I mentioned earlier, we also measure the opposites. As well as big picture thinking, we measure down to earth, as well as discipline-driven, inspiration-driven, and so on. And we measure both ends, and we do that independently. So it's possible that somebody could be both, and we measure both, positively in the underlying form and the everyday form, but also we measure in the overextended form too. You can see how the Jungian model correlates with the Big 5 model. So big picture thinking is of course intuition and down-to-earth sensing, and this goes back to the Costa-McCree paper linking to the MBTI some many years ago. So that's something just to orientate you as to how the Spark model was developed. I'm now going to go specifically into why is it laid out in a circumplex structure, and here are the theoretical objectives. We want to measure both ends. We want to measure at 10 scale, so the big 5 doubled into 10, and we want to consider valence and descriptive content. What does that mean? Well, the descriptive content is, in the case of extroversion, it would be am I enthusiastic, am I cheerful? In the case of introversion, do I listen to people before I speak? Do I choose my words carefully? That would be the descriptive content. The valence would be how positively I'm expressing my emotion and to what extent I have good self-esteem, and how does that impact how I fill in a questionnaire. You'll see now why this is relevant when we look at balancing the polarities. And the research I'm about to share with you looks at the factor structure, a 4-factor model, a 2-factor model, and so on. So empirically here, what we're trying to do is test, do we still have the big 5 here when we split things out and measure both ends? How does it fit with Digman's analysis, Digman's 2-factor model? And how does Digman's model fit around a circumplex structure? If we have a look now, you'll see we've reordered all the aspects, and we've taken 4 of the factors from the big 5. We've reordered them according to how they correlate, and we're going to explore the column on the left is that beta plasticity, Digman and de Jong's terminology, or on the right is it alpha and stability, and how would that lay out? Well, this is it in the circular model. So we're hypothesizing that personality can be structured in a circular model based on the correlations. Here's 4 of the big 5 overlain with the Jungian terminology too, and we're now going to test and see, does this structure really hold up? Do the correlations, does the factor analysis support this sort of structure? So the sample size was a decent 2,506 people, and a Varimax rotation was used. With a Likert scale, strongly agree through to strongly disagree, and a number of subscales. If we look at the 5-factor model, we can see we're explaining a decent amount of the variance here, and indeed when we do a factor analysis, we do get the traditional 5-factor model shining through. Here are the results from a 5-factor analysis. You can see here we have achieved a simple structure with the possible exception of down to earth there at the bottom, which is also linking onto introversion. And you can see, for example, with discipline driven, 0.95 on the 2nd factor, and inspiration driven, a nice high negative number as well. So getting positive and negative loadings across the different clusters of the items. And we can break it down further and have a look at the 5 factors at the level of the facets underneath it. And again, we get a nice simple structure, again evidence-based, and caution so on are cross-loading this time onto conscientiousness. And we're getting a nice positive and negative loading across the opposites, exactly in the way that we would expect. Now we can replicate this as a 4-factor model. So here's the 4-factor version, which is typically how we work when we're using the core Spark model with just 24 qualities. And you can see a decent proportion of the variance has been explained. What I'm going to do now is explain to you a 2-factor version of this. What if we force the Spark data that's been designed based on 4 factors, but we force it into a 2-factor solution? Well, this is what the factor analysis looks like. And if we graph it and have component 1 and component 2 as the 2 axes, you can immediately see the circular structure shining through. And if we blow that up a little bit and have a look in further, we can see here's people focused, and then next to it is inspiration driven, and then big picture thinking. And as we work around the mandala, we do in fact have the structure that was hypothesized at the beginning of this talk. That's what I wanted to say for now. I hope you found that interesting to see how a factor analysis forced into a 2-factor model plotted against each other on 2 axes, X and Y, can be used to support and justify an interesting layout of this data. Thank you.